Hello everyone. So we're going to talk about man training. Mans are requests. This is when a child, for example, asks for cookie, water, chip, spins, tickles, bubbles, you name it. This is under the control of their motivation. So I'm motivated for water because I just went for a long run. I'm going to ask for water or drink some water. Now, because we want our learners to ask, that we want them to come through us, we want to contrive situations in which the learner will come to us to ask. So I want you to think as you are this person who is going to be giving and doing a lot of those, giving the learner things. So you want the learner to come to you. So you want to contrive the motivation and the situation to get the child to come to you. How do you do that? So one, you can provide freebies. So I'm going to give you, let's say we're using chip. I'm going to give you a small piece of chip, and I'm going to watch and see, are you interested in this chip? Do you still want more of the chip? Do you look? Are you approaching? Do you put your hand out? Any type of behavior that would show that you are interested. If the child doesn't show any interest, I might do another piece of chip. I'm going to see. Sometimes you give 2, 3, 4 of the item. It could be bubbles, it could be spins, it could be the toy, it could be markers, and the child is not showing that motivation yet. Sometimes it takes a little bit of building up. Don't give up right away. Keep trying a little bit longer. If you really sense, by the end of that there's no motivation, then you can move on and, you can target another man potentially. That's why we try to set anywhere between 3 to 5 mans, because if, man for chip today, the child's not into it or in that moment, then I can do spins, or I can do bubbles, or I can do shaving cream, or I can do paint, etc. You want to give small amounts of that item so that you can build up that motivation. If the motivation is built, then great. You want to watch out for satiation, but you also want to look for ways to create that deprivation. So satiation is when the child is kind of like full of the item. I've had enough chip. I feel full. I don't need to eat anymore. I've been playing with the iPad all day, so I really don't care for the iPad. That's when someone is satiated. Deprivation is where we can try to create those opportunities for the child to kind of miss that item. So for example, not having free access to trains all day, not having access to trains maybe at home, so that we can create during our man training session the opportunities to play with trains, so the child will be motivated to want to play with those trains. So think about that. Think about, has the learner had access to this item all day? Do they get free access to it? Have they satiated from it, so that you can manipulate your man training session in a way to make it the most successful. So, again, when we go back to deprivation, how do we create that? We want to, control the reinforcer so that the child doesn't have free access to it all day. But then we're also going to create opportunities where we give samples. And by giving a sample, I'm not giving the whole thing. For example, if you're using an Oreo cookie, you're not going to give the entire Oreo cookie if the child says, Oreo, for example, or cookie. You're only going to give a small sample. So think about that when you're creating those opportunities. If you're, let's say, listening to music, I might only give them 10 seconds of music and not give them a minute of it. If I give too long, then again, the child may satiate, and now they're not going to ask for it. So I'm going to give small bits, 10 to 15 seconds, then I can actually run more trials than if I gave it for a minute. So think about that when you are working with your learner doing a man training session. Controlling the reinforcer is really important. So if the child has free access to it, it's on the table, it's on the floor, they can just walk away and get it from the shelf or a different one off the shelf, then the child's not going to come through you and ask for the item. So control the reinforcer. Don't let them have access to it all day. Don't let the child have access to it freely. Make sure that you're putting it in a place where the child's not just grabbing it off the table, so maybe closer to you, in a bin on the floor, things like that. The amount of the reinforcer, so the magnitude of the reinforcer, is also very crucial. If I give the child, for example, if we go back to music, 5 minutes of listening to music, and then I pause and maybe have the learner ask for music again, they may not be really interested in asking for it because they just listened, to it for 5 minutes. But if I gave 10 to 15 seconds, it's enough to, get them going, but then they need more, so they'll ask for more. Excuse me. I would also really, ensure that when you're giving, and you're holding off, when you're about to pause, let's say the music or the video or whatever it may be, really pay attention to the part. Sometimes what may happen is the child is watching, part of the movie, and then you pause like in a moment where may not be, let's say, the greatest moment. It's not like a break in the movie or a break in the song. And that may actually trigger some problem behavior. So just watch out for that, especially if you're starting to teach and you're going into table type teaching. We can talk about that at a later point, but you want to pause at a point where it's reasonable for us to pause so that we can, again, target the child to say the mand or the request, whatever it may be for that teaching. But just pay attention to that. Be attentive to the environment as well. Sometimes we try to, contrive situations or do certain things, but there's other stuff happening in the environment that may make it really difficult for us to contrive those situations. So again, be mindful of the what's happening around you, so that your learner is really focused on what you're doing. Like I'll give you the example. Sometimes we're working on, let's say the child is playing with trains, and they love trains, but they may love other things too, and the child across the room is playing with bubbles, and it's just looking like so much fun, and they're popping the bubbles, and so your learner is just looking over at the bubbles going, oh man, that looks like a lot of fun compared to my trains, because right now bubbles looks way more fun than my trains. So again, be mindful of those things, be attentive to your environment so that you can manipulate whether, okay, is this the right time for me to be doing trains? Maybe I should move away from the table and do something else that may motivate the learner a little bit more. Okay. When you're doing man training, or especially in the beginning part, when you're really building that relationship with the learner, taking things away can really make you become a very aversive person. So try not to take anything away. For example, if you're doing markers, have like 6 or 7 markers, and you can give, one marker at a time, and maybe even a trade-off. Like if I give you the blue marker, you need to give up that red marker. And that just keeps the trials going and going, because then you can, ask for many colors and many markers, and just keep kind of recycling through them. And if you're pulling something out, let's say you're pulling out Play-Doh, and you pull out 3 different colors of containers, and you place them all in front of the learner, well, you've just lost control. Make sure that you are controlling those reinforcers by having them closer to you, because then if you give them and then you take them away, you end up looking like a bad guy. So be very mindful of what you're taking out, what you're putting on your table, let's say, or in your environment, that you're giving enough but not too much, that you're not taking away, that you're giving more. And when you're giving more, you're able to take away, so that the child doesn't really feel that takeaway, especially in the beginning. We're talking about really building that bond and that relationship with the learner. A lot of these man type programs, I'm really referring to the very early learners, potentially intermediate learners that are, learning to ask for things using a single word, maybe 2 words. So you really want to be mindful of those kinds of things. And then you want to pay attention to, like I said earlier, was when they're showing interest. So when you're giving those freebies, you're looking for, is the child approaching, looking, reaching, their body, how's it oriented? Are they away from me? Are they coming towards me? Their facial expressions, are they smiling? Are they laughing? Are they enjoying it? These are great cues to either keep on going or to stop. And then, again, watch out with your tone of voice. You're not too loud that, maybe it's really bothering the learner if you're too loud and you're kind of like screaming in their ear versus speaking too quietly and the learner can't even hear you. So you got to find something in the middle. It's not too much, not too little. Figure out a way to really communicate with your learner, and pick up on those cues. It is communication, even if it's nonverbal. Like, you're communicating with them, they're communicating with you, and a lot of it right now is just nonverbal. You want to be in a position where you are, nice and low to the child's level so that they don't feel like you're standing and just kind of towering over them. So there's a lot of communication happening here, and you have to really kind of get in sync with your learner. And I always tell, all the therapists that I train, it's like any relationship. You're starting to build that bond. You're starting to build that connection. You really got to be able to read them. They're reading you too. They're going to know when you're about to place a demand on them. They're going to know when you're about to call them back to the table. They're very intuitive. They know that you're about to wrap up the activity to call them back to the table, or you are they just read up. They read these cues very well. So I really encourage you to really read your learner, really get to know them. Know that, okay, this is really pushing the limit here. I can't push anymore. So really get in tune with your learner, and it'll make a world of a difference when you're teaching them, especially during man training. With man training programs, there are different strategies. So follow the teaching procedures. So if you are at a treatment center, or if you're at our center, you want to look at the program sheet and follow it. Look at the teaching procedure and make sure you're executing it in that way. Watch your tone of voice. You want to run trials accurately based on the program sheet. You want to try to get maybe 3 to 5 prompted trials per minute. So you don't want to wait too long in between trials. So if I prompt, let's say, cookie, and then I wait 5 minutes later and I prompt cookie, I don't want to do 1 per minute. That's a little too long, because then I won't get enough trials in my day. But maybe 3 to 5. Again, you have to really look at your learner, because there's variables. Like, if the child is eating a piece of candy, even if it's a small piece, it might take them longer to chew it. So you can't run a trial right away because they're still chewing. Maybe if you're doing, for example, spins, if you spin them, sometimes you and your learner may get really dizzy. So you really want to pay attention to those. And that's why I like to switch between mans, because I might do a couple of spins and then a couple of, edibles, and then maybe go into sensory, because I can't do one back to back to back for a very long period of time, because I may not be able to. Sometimes you can, and that's okay too. Collect your data. So make sure at the end of your man training session, you've collected your prompted versus independent trials. And try to avoid the sing-song voice. So if you're doing something like cookie, rather than, just saying cookie, you're saying cookie, Play-Doh. I hear that a lot. And that's something you really want to get rid of, because we don't want our learner talking that way. We don't want them saying cookie, Play-Doh. It doesn't sound natural. It doesn't sound good. So cookie, Play-Doh, up, spin, bubbles. And just try to practice that, tone of voice, especially if you're doing 3 trial, like if you're saying it 3 times or 4 times in a row. Bubbles, 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 and then I would blow. Cookie, 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 piece of cookie. If I were doing the 3 trials, if you're doing a trial, like saying it and then they repeat, like in a echoic, with your transfer trial, then that's then same thing. You're going to say cookie, the child says cookie, but just avoid the sing-song kind of voice. We don't want that. And then you want to make sure that when your learner is requesting that they have a nice audible voice that you can hear it. It might be just approximations, and that's okay. You and your team have to determine what is okay for that. So if the target is cookie and the child says ookie, then that's going to be what's accepted for now. We can shape that up later on. Eye contact is, I think it should be just a must from the get-go. A lot of people are okay with their learner talking like this, and I'm cookie. I'm not. I really think that the learner needs to learn to orient towards the person. You may not get that perfect eye contact where they're looking you right in the eye, but at least they're oriented towards you. And if you can catch those natural opportunities where it happens just so naturally, like for example, if you're playing with water and you're pouring the water and you're like, water, and then you kind of wait and you look at them, sometimes that just a couple of seconds of a wait will get the learner to just look at you because they're anticipating it and they want you to pour that water. And that moment right there, you could pour that water. So, and that's how you can build up eye contact, just by doing little things like that, where eye contact actually gets reinforced by the activity that they want. And that's something that I think is really important. What is the reinforcer? Is the reinforcer me saying, good job for saying bubbles? I don't know. I don't think so. Really, it should be that if let's say I'm blowing bubbles and they say bubbles, they get bubbles because they said bubbles. That's the reinforcer. If they say cookie, they get cookie. That's the reinforcer. If they say spin and I spin them around, that's the reinforcer. You don't need to say things like, good job saying spin, or wow, that's awesome, you said cookie. You really don't need to do that. The reinforcer is the item that is being delivered. So think of that the next time that you're running your man session. And catch yourself. Are you saying good job, for saying spin? It's the same thing with eye contact. I find a lot of people will say that sometimes, good job for looking at me. They looked at you because there was probably something that was happening in that interaction, and you reinforced it with giving that item or whatever it may be. But, socially, we don't reinforce people for looking at us. We just have that nice social interaction and that, connection, and that's reinforcing in itself. So if someone is looking at me while they're talking to me and I smile and I look at them, that may be the reinforcer for them, me being attentive and smiling and nodding and being engaged in that conversation. So think about that when you're running your trials, and how do you reinforce your learner? When you're setting up a man session, think about the order and how you want to run the mans. So if you know that your learner loves, to be rocked, and one of your targets is, rocking a blanket, and that is like the best thing that they absolutely love, and they could probably do that all day long. Starting with that may be a little challenging because moving them away from it could be really hard. So think about the order of how you want to do your mans and try to just vary it. Like I'll do, like I said, an edible, and then I might do a toy, and then do sensory, and just, switch around and try to get as many trials as I can for each one. And just kind of change up the order. And then, transitioning your learner from one man to another. Sometimes that can be very tricky for people. They'll be fixated on, let's say, doing chip. But you need to, let's say, do like a sensory one. Let's say it was paint or something. So just finding a way to, transition your learner from one activity to the next. And it may not, it shouldn't be abrupt. It shouldn't be like we're stopping here. I might actually, if I'm doing chip and I'm taking out the paint, I can still give a few freebies of the chip as I'm, taking out the paint and setting that activity up. And then, maybe putting it aside. Now, if the learner is still showing motivation or interest in it, I could still have it there. I could do my painting, while the chip is there, and slowly and gradually move away from chip, and as I'm getting them into the painting activity. So think about, some ways. Again, abrupt is always hard for a lot of our learners, and just kind of starting that nice gradual flow into a different manned target is good. Sometimes even moving away, and like moving away from your table, or going and, let's say, jumping on the trampoline, just getting away and kind of breaking that cycle of what we were just doing, sometimes can really help as well. And then, the use of saying, what do you want? Try to avoid that. Those are prompts, and they're so hard to fade. And then our children become so dependent on them. Your learner will basically be waiting for you. And I had this, when I first started in the field, a little guy, he just stood there and he was just looking at me, and I'm like, what does he want? What's going on? I'm not sure. And he was waiting for me to say, what do you want, every single time, even though I knew, and he knew, that he wanted the chips, but he wouldn't say it unless I said, what do you want? And so, that was a very nice, natural learning experience for me, and then obviously through reading the research and looking at the data, that kids who are that get taught to respond to what do you want become so dependent on it. So try to fade that as quickly as you possibly can, and the way to do that is just by prompting the item. So if it's cookie, you're just going to say cookie, like I said before, rather than saying, what do you want, cookie, and the child then, let's say, says cookie. Let's try to get rid of all those prompts. And, again, our focus is to get our learners to be as independent as possible. And the more that I have prompts built into their world, the less likely they're going to be able to do it on their own. So, and this goes with anything, whether it's putting on their shoes or getting dressed or using the washroom, anything. The more that I'm prompting, and especially verbal prompts, the harder it will be to fade those. So try to eliminate that as quickly as possible. Set good targets, again, across categories, across different things, so you're not stuck with just food items, because that's not good. And then make sure that, before you start, you have a good number of reinforcers that this child likes. So if they only like 3 things, you're going to be so limited in setting manned targets. So make sure that they like a variety of different things. Some things may be very specific to them, and then you can become a little bit more general with, the type of things. Like it might be like something like chip and cookie and paint, but then down the road, it might be other things like, whether it's water play or iPad or music, and you can shift and do other things to expand their repertoire. So really, when they go home, they can ask their parents for the things that they encounter at home as well. And that's, again, our goal is we don't want to just set targets for things that we see at the center. We're thinking long term, how can we help the family at home so that the learner can go home and say, Play-Doh or water, or, no thank you. Let's say if we were going, if we were tackling those kinds of things down the road. Another thing to think about is avoid the very generic mands. Now this is debatable, because some people might say, well, isn't it better just to teach the child to say eat than to have problem behaviors? It might be. But if you can get the learner to use very specific targets, such as chip, spin, bubbles, book, Play-Doh, paint, then we know exactly what they want. If they just say toy, then again, we're going to be like, well, which toy? What is it that you want? It's still very unclear to us, and that can still trigger problem behavior, because they say toy to you, and then you're like, well, which toy? And then they are getting frustrated with you because you're not understanding them. So again, think about the targets, but you have to definitely talk to the clinical team to decide on what's the best approach for the learner, to make sure that, we're setting the right targets, we're using the right form of communication. Not every child can use vocal communication. It might be PECs, it might be signs. You got to look into the best form of communication. What if your learner is not learning? So, you've been running this MAND program, and, let's say after 5 consecutive days of no probes, the child is not showing any progress. You need to start asking yourself some questions. How are the number of trials? So if I looked at the data, am I only doing 10 trials a day of my MANDs? Well, that's too low. That could definitely be a problem. What about the teaching procedure? Is the teaching procedure the right teaching procedure? Is it, accurate for that? Is it consistent across therapists or people that are working with the learner? So if I'm doing it one way and another therapist is doing it a different way, that's already going to cause a problem. What if I'm doing it one way and then the parents are doing something completely different at home? That could cause potentially a problem. You want to think about your classroom, the environment. Is it the right setup? Are there too many distractions? Is the learner just getting up and getting what they want? The targets, are the targets the right targets for the learner? Did we set the right things? Or did the learner like it the first day because we presented it to them because it was novel, but then they showed no interest after day 2 and 3? So it may be a target selection issue. And then, again, not assessing the motivation well in that moment. I went too quickly to probe the target, or, I just gave them one freebie and, well, they didn't show interest. So moving on, and it was a no. No, you got to give it some time. You got to really build up that motivation. Just think of yourself if you have to go to the gym. Sometimes it's not just a matter of, okay, it's Tuesday, I got to get up and go to the gym. It might be, well, I got to get up and I've got to have my cup of coffee first, and, maybe talk to a few friends that kind of encourage me to go to the gym. Maybe I need to make my smoothie. I got to put on my, good gym outfit to motivate me. So there's a lot of things that we do to motivate ourselves to do things. It's the same thing when we're trying to teach our learners to request something. I can't just provide them with, maybe a chip, or if it's something different like trains, or that might take a little bit more of creativity to get the learner to really be like, oh, wow, I really want to play with the trains. Yeah. So think about those and try to create those opportunities where you make it really fun to build those motivation, and don't jump right into probing it just to probe it. You can wait a little bit, but the moment that you prompt it, then you've got to take that probe data. And if you prompted it, then it's a no. Then we have to look at, if the learner is just getting no after no after no, day after day after day, well, is it any of those things that we talked about? Another thing could also be schedule. If the child you only see them twice a week, they may not be able to remember or retain that, training. So if you see them on a Tuesday and then on a Saturday, that may not be enough for them to remember that MAND, that practice. So that might be an issue. But again, there are ways around that. You can have the parents tackle that at home on the days that they're not with you, and things that you can do to encourage that language and keep the learner going. So again, things to avoid when you're doing MAND training: avoid pointing to your eye to get the child to look at you. Avoid, like taking the item and like, oh, look at this. That's not going to really motivate them, like I said before. So the motivation has to be from within. They really want this item, to play with it, or to interact with it, or to eat it, or to even be around you. So find creative ways to get the motivation. Don't just wave things around, and then don't use the phrase, what do you want? Because again, the child will become prompt dependent on that, and you will really struggle with undoing that. And we want to, rather than undoing things, we just want to teach as effectively as possible using the best strategies. So good luck with your MAND training sessions, and I hope you have great success teaching your learners and they all start talking for you, or at least manding for you using other forms of communication. Good luck.